Well, hello and welcome everybody. My name is Lucas Fraser. I'm the president of CEP Ottawa, Connecting Environmental Professionals Ottawa. So happy to see all of you here tonight. To all of our members, welcome. To people who have been to our events before in the past, welcome. And to all the newcomers, we're so happy to have you here. This has been our biggest event of the year and the biggest event since I joined CEP Ottawa in 2019. So, just hearing a little bit of background noise here, but that's all right. CEP Ottawa is a nonprofit, volunteer-led organization based in Ottawa with chapters across the country that have been around for about just over 17 years. Originally founded in Toronto, but there are now chapters in Ottawa, Toronto, Vancouver, and Calgary. So we do a lot of collaboration, but we're individual organizations focusing on connecting and engaging environment and sustainability professionals in the Ottawa area specifically. Since COVID happened, a lot of people have been joining from all across the country and from other countries, which is very exciting for us. But that's a bit about our organization. We do have a really big year coming, and I'm excited to tell you more about that, but I'll wait until the end of the event to share that. Today, however, as you can see by my screen, we're talking about drawdown. And we're all really, really thrilled to be putting this event together in collaboration with Project Drawdown. But just to introduce a little bit of context, throughout the course of this last, somewhat unsettling year, as well as before that, a lot more people are starting to take a serious look into environment and sustainability challenges. Professionals are starting to take on more workload within organizations and governments as this becomes more of a priority around the world. And as more and more people are starting in this field, there's this kind of exploration of what does sustainability mean? What does environment mean? We often kind of start our journey in the same place, looking at this and seeing, wow, there's a lot happening. There are a lot of really big challenges, really big problems like climate change, waste, and you kind of start to explore these different areas. And then as you go through the problems, you start to wonder what the heck are the solutions to all of these problems. And I, like many other people, ended up turning to Project Drawdown, which you can't see, but I'm holding up the book here, when I started to look for these solutions. What was true before the pandemic, as well as during the pandemic, is that we begin our journeys into the world of climate and sustainability. You learn the problems and then you learn the solutions. And Drawdown, since it was released, has been the go-to for what are the solutions? What do we do to solve these enormous problems? And what are people actually doing? And what do some of the solutions that I'm seeing out there actually result in? So it's an incredibly powerful and deep resource that has gone from being simply a book to a huge thriving community led by the organization Project Drawdown, as well as all the individuals who have been inspired and continue to rely on their work. It's a masterclass in a book and now in an organization on how we can actually work towards solving the climate crisis, as well as some of the other significant challenges. This is what I did. I turned to Drawdown. This is what many others have done. And this is why I'm so pleased to be sharing this discussion in collaboration with Project Drawdown, represented by Crystal tonight. And to get more into what tonight's event will actually hold, I'll pass it off to Amanda, who's going to introduce the event and the speakers.
Thanks, Lucas. So hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this really exciting event on climate solutions. We're going to start the event with an overview of Project Drawdown and their framework, followed by an engaging panel discussion. Crystal Tussell, Senior Director of Partnerships at Project Drawdown, will kick off the discussion with an overview of the framework. She will then moderate a panel discussion of experts from sectors identified in the Project Drawdown framework. Our panel, on our panel, we have Alison Penner. She's the Executive Director and Founder at Reimagine Agriculture, and she will be representing the food and agriculture sector. We also have Chris Meakin, Energy Consultant at Exicon Roofing and Solar, who will be representing the electricity sector, and Shafraz Kaba. He's an integrated project delivery expert and architect at EcoAmmo, and he'll be representing the building sector. With that, I'm really excited for tonight, and I will hand it over to Crystal to kick things off.
Thank you so much, Amanda. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you tonight. I'm going to share my screen and present some slides. Okay, so before we discuss climate solutions specifically, let's just review a little bit about the science of climate change for some context. So increased concentrations of greenhouse gases in the Earth's atmosphere trap heat from the sun and have led to global warming. And then over time, this warming affects weather patterns and results in climate change. Now, there are several gases called greenhouse gases that trap heat in the Earth's atmosphere, causing average global temperatures to rise. And I'm going over this because this is what Project Drawdown is primarily focused on, these concentrations of greenhouse gases. So carbon dioxide is the most prevalent of these gases. It's released when we burn fossil fuels and when we burn organic matter, such as trees. Methane is released from landfills and processing of fossil fuels and digestive tracts of grazing animals. As a greenhouse gas, it's 84 times more potent than carbon dioxide. Nitrous oxide is released from fertilizers and animal manure. It's 300 times more potent than carbon dioxide. And the refrigerant gases, they're fluorocarbons that are used in our refrigerators and air conditioning systems, are thousands of times more potent than carbon dioxide. Now, where are these increasing concentrations of greenhouse gases coming from? This gray box represents the Earth's atmosphere. And these bands on the left side represent all of the types of human activity that send greenhouse gases up into the atmosphere. About 25% come from our electricity production, an equal amount, about 24% from our food, agriculture, and land use, 21% from industry, 14% from transportation, 6% from buildings, and 10% from other energy-related emissions. Now, some of the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is removed by natural, biological, and chemical processes that are called sinks. And about 24% is removed by plants through photosynthesis. And that carbon is stored in plants, trees, and soil. And then about another 17% is absorbed by the oceans through chemical reactions and photosynthesis by algae and phytoplankton. So currently, the majority of greenhouse gases, about 59%, remain in the atmosphere. Now, what is drawdown? Drawdown is the point when greenhouse gases in the Earth's atmosphere begin to steadily go down each year. And it's also a goal for the world. Now, we have not yet reached drawdown. Greenhouse gas levels have been increasing, especially during the past 60 years. This blue dot on the slide represents the moment of drawdown. It's the turning point when the increase stops and begins to go down. So how do we achieve drawdown? And this is what Project Drawdown as an organization is all about. We've been working on answering the question of whether it's possible to reach drawdown using solutions that already exist without any invention of new technology. And Project Drawdown created the first apples to apples comparison of a full spectrum of climate solutions across multiple sectors. So we've had an international team of more than 100 researchers working on the answer to this question of can we reach drawdown since 2015. And our team has conducted a meta-analysis of all the current worldwide research and data about climate solutions. Although there's been extensive modeling of the climate problem, there's been far less attention on solution modeling. So our team has also done comprehensive and systematic modeling of climate solutions at a global scale, a global level, to project whether it's possible to reach drawdown by the year 2050. And we've done this meta-analysis and modeling for more than 80 different solution practices and technologies. And initial results of this analysis were released in 2017 with ongoing updates. Now, the drawdown solutions do not include every climate solution that currently exists in the world. The solutions included in our analysis are categories of technology and practices that reduce greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. And for each of the solutions included, there is scientific consensus backed by data that they are currently available and scaling up, financially viable, have a proven potential to reduce greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, and there is sufficient data to be able to model the potential of the technology or practice at a global scale. Now, there are no theoretical silver bullets included in this set of solutions, no unproven technologies, nothing that's still under development, nothing that can't be scaled. So new technologies and practices, once they are developed, proven, and viable, will be able to help us reach drawdown faster. Solutions already exist and are already in practice, many for decades, but they must be aggressively scaled worldwide in order to reach drawdown. Now, we've looked at this in terms of 3 categories of solutions that can help us reach drawdown. The first of these categories is solutions that reduce sources of greenhouse gases that are going up into the atmosphere because of human activity. Now, these are important and very effective solutions in the reduced sources category because they create an immediate reduction in the gases going up into the atmosphere. And they're in a number of sectors: electricity, food, agriculture, and land use, industry, transport, and buildings. Now, in the electricity sector, these are solutions that replace carbon-based electricity with renewable energy as quickly as possible and improve the broader electricity system. And solutions in this category also reduce demand for electricity by enhancing efficiency. And solutions in this category improve or replace the materials that are used in industry and reclaim waste as a resource. And address refrigerants. And solutions that reduce sources of greenhouse gases also enhance the efficiency of vehicles and electrified vehicles, such as electric cars and bikes. And these solutions shift to transportation alternatives, such as telepresence. Within the building sector, these solutions enhance the energy efficiency of buildings and provide alternatives to the energy sources that are used to heat space, heat water, and prepare meals. Now, there are a number of solutions within the food, agriculture, and land use sector that can reduce the 24% of greenhouse gas emissions worldwide that are generated by this sector. And these solutions protect ecosystems. They shift agricultural practices. They address food waste and diets. Now, this slide shows a representation of the solutions within the food, agriculture, and land use sector. The size of the circles shows the potential of each solution relative to the other solutions in that sector. And those 2 large circles on the left represent plant-rich diet and reduced food waste. Now, relative to all other solutions in this sector, these 2 have the greatest potential to reduce emissions. And we'll hear more about this during our panel discussion. Now, the second category of solutions are those that support sinks. So you'll remember that sinks are the natural processes shown on the right side of this graphic that draw carbon out of the atmosphere. Solutions that support sinks use degraded land. They shift agricultural practices and protect and restore ecosystems. And many of these solutions also fall in the reduce sources category of solutions, but their greatest impact is as land sinks. And a few examples are conservation agriculture, regenerative annual cropping, silvopasture, and managed grazing. Now, there's a third category of solutions that we call improved society. Now, although most climate solutions have co-benefits that solve problems beyond climate change, one specific drawdown solution falls within this improved society category. Now, when people have access to quality education and levels of education rise, particularly for girls and young women, uptake of reproductive health care improves where it is available. And in turn, women's political, social, and economic empowerment expand and fertility rates typically fall. The result of sexual and reproductive health and rights is slower population growth and therefore reduced consumption. And this is particularly impactful in high-income countries where consumption-related emissions are highest. Now, although some solutions offer greater potential emissions reduction, climate solutions are interconnected and interdependent, and we must scale all of them to reach drawdown. Now, this is the cover of the book that Project Drawdown published in 2017. In case you're looking for more information about climate solutions. In last year, 2020, we published the Drawdown Review, which presents our most recent framework, way of looking at the landscape of solutions, along with updated results of our modeling. And then this year, we published this Climate Solutions 101 video series that's available at our website, drawdown.org. So I wanted to only give a brief overview of Project Drawdown's work so that we can go to our panelists and hear more about what's happening in Ottawa and Canada generally. But please feel free to visit drawdown.org for more information about our work. So now I'd like to turn to our panelists. And I think that I might start with you, Chris, since your expertise is in the electricity generation sector, and that's where often the sector we think of often first when we're thinking about climate solutions. So I'd love for you to just tell us about your work and what you're working on.
Thank you, Crystal. Hexagon specializes in residential installation as well as commercial flat roof. Some of the current projects that we're working on are in conjunction with the Climate Action Incentive Fund through the federal government. Those are larger projects, putting systems on multi-unit residential buildings, as well as commercial flat roof. We just completed a large school project in New Orleans where there was the installation of 1,000 panels. One of the ones that gets me most excited is dealing with the home builders. So we're now designing net zero neighborhoods and communities as opposed to individual homes or demonstration homes for a new community. Now the builders are actually looking at fully electrified homes. So not bringing in natural gas, avoiding that utility, the expense of having natural gas coming into the community, as well as the greenhouse gas emissions. it's become more affordable now to fully electrify in the building process. So the actual builders are on board now with designing their communities that way. So they're looking at the orientation of the homes, how the roof layouts are designed, making sure that we're avoiding consumption by using a negawatt principle during the design process, making sure that the buildings are as energy efficient as possible. Net zero means going to 80% above current code. And then the remaining 20% is with a renewable generation source. So the home builders now see the writing on the wall because net zero is going to be code by 2030 in Ontario. So they're looking to get out ahead of that, building homes now that will be selling by 2030 during the usual 12-year process of somebody living in a home. So that's really refreshing to me because now it's taking place at a level where decision makers that are designing entire communities are on board with designing them in a way that they're environmentally friendly and cost effective.
Great. So do you see this as a sort of a systemic change that needs to happen and is happening?
Yeah, the systemic side is more, the political will is there now. So we're seeing programs. So the federal government has a greener homes program whereby you go through the process of getting an energy audit done by an NRCan energy advisor. They'll give you some guidance on recommendations for energy efficiency for a retrofit for a home. You enact those measures, and then you'll qualify for an interest-free loan through CMHC, as well as a $5,000 grant. Energy Evolution Ottawa is another one where that's a municipal PACE program whereby the lending mechanism for homeowners is put on the property identification number. So it's part of the property taxes as opposed to the individuals in the house having to go to the bank, relying on a lending rate through a mortgage provider or home equity line of credit. Now the municipality is actually going to be financing the projects, whether it's better doors and windows, lighting, insulation, air source heat pumps, solar on the roof. So all of those things will help with mass adoption. So instead of people of a certain tax bracket being able to afford these measures, now we're passing that chasm. We're going into mass adoption because of these lending mechanisms. So now it's down where it should be. Our solar is meant for people on fixed incomes, low income earners, because they want to do their part for the environment. They also want to save money. That's what this stuff is about. It's fixing your costs. It's making sure that you can not have to worry about whether you're going to pay your hydro bill or put groceries in the fridge. So we're reaching a point with these financial mechanisms that it's making it affordable for middle and lower income earners.
That's wonderful. Do you, is this what you would say was the biggest hurdle or challenge, was making renewable electricity affordable?
Definitely. I firmly believe that. So today was garbage day in my neighborhood, and anybody who went through the garbage last night and was willing to recycle, they'd probably like to have a solar system on the roof. And the biggest hurdle has been the upfront cost. And panel prices, for instance, went down from 2009 to 2017 by 90%. Wow. So it's now much more economical to produce electricity on your roof yourself and consume it yourself than it is to pull it from the grid, where that electricity is being produced in Ontario most of the time from a nuclear power plant that's about 400 kilometers away.
Would you say there are any other obstacles to this uptake of renewable energy or net zero homes?
There's always going to be difficulty on the regulatory side as well as the political side because there's an ebb and flow to politics. So right now, things are trending in the right direction. The federal government has been talking about these initiatives since the last federal election. But because of the pandemic, a lot of things were put on hold. But now it's being rolled out. It was announced in the budget 3 weeks ago. It's already got Treasury Board approval. So now these programs are rolling out. You're always going to run into difficulties with different types of government. So Queen's Park, for instance, right now, they don't necessarily see the writing on the wall as far as the job growth and economic benefits. So educating on that side is always necessary. There's policies like third-party net metering, virtual net metering. Those types of things need to be brought into place in Ontario, just like they are in other jurisdictions like the unregulated market in Alberta, or with forward-thinking local distribution companies like Nova Scotia Power.
So what's the picture like in Ontario as far as solar or other renewable, like in terms of percentages?
So we still have 90% of the installs in the country. Alberta's catching up to us. A lot of it was because of the feed-in tariff program that was implemented by the McGuinty government when he was shutting down the coal-fired plants. At that time, it was an affordability issue. So you were allowed to sell back to the grid for a much higher price than you were consuming it. But now with net metering and self-consumption, it now makes sense to produce it yourself and consume it yourself. You're cutting your electricity costs in half over the course of the 25-year manufacturer's warranty for the panels.
So, but what about percentages of homes? Do you know like what percentage of homes have solar or some other type of renewable energy?
It's still low. So there's probably, I think, 620 solar installations residential in the main area in Hydro Ottawa territory. But the ambition is there and the political will is there now. So I may be getting these numbers wrong, but I believe it's 26% of the homes in the next 4 years are expected to go through energy efficiency retrofits that are going to be utilizing the financial tool through the municipal PACE program through Energy Evolution Ottawa. So that's very aggressive. 26% of homes in 4 years, that's aggressive.
Yeah. I wonder if you know, and it's okay if you don't, but I wonder if you know how this compares, how Ontario compares with the rest of the world in terms of uptake of solar.
In Canada, again, we're leading, but if you compare us to jurisdictions like California and New Jersey, for instance, we're a decade behind.
And do you think that, but you think you're on track to catch up?
I do, because the early adopters in those states, they had state, federal, municipal programs, a lot of tax breaks, those things, types of things, because it was expensive. But because of the decline in price from 2009 to 2017, since then we've seen a kind of a flat line on panel prices. But because of that decline over the past decade, this next decade makes it's becoming a no-brainer. So one of the other systemic things that we often run up against is the people who own homes right now tend to be of a certain age and a certain demographic. They look like me, right? But coming up, the generations behind us who are coming into their earning years, this is like, why didn't it happen already? That's the mentality. And then you go another generation further. My daughters are 13 and 15 right now, and they actually get upset with me that this hasn't happened yet. So we're seeing a generational change, but a lot of it's being dictated by price. It's cost effective now. You're fixing your costs. So levelized cost of electricity is something I deal with it on a regular basis in our proposals. So we're showing things like net present value, internal rate of return, return on investment, levelized cost of electricity. You didn't hear me talk about a tree there, did you? These are all financial decisions that people are making now.
Yes. So I'm just wondering about uptake for for rental units. So say I rent my apartment and I don't have control over whether my building goes solar. What are you seeing in those situations?
So I'll go back to, well, a good organization to join locally is the Ottawa Renewable Energy Cooperative. So they're able to do external projects that you can invest in and benefit from it. But what we need on the multi-unit residential building side of things is third-party and virtual net metering, where you're producing at one location and consuming at a different location.
And what do you think is the mechanism for scaling that?
Voting against a Doug Ford government.
Okay. Since I'm not local, I'm not sure. I can't say, I can't comment on that, but I'm sure the audience understands. Well, Chris, that sounds like super good news is happening in the electricity generation sector. I want to go on to Allison now. Allison, tell us about your work and what you're currently working on.
Sure. So I founded Reimagine Agriculture to help us kind of focus more on these issues. Unfortunately, I think my talk will probably be a little bit less pleasant than Chris because we've got a lot of work in terms of the agricultural sector. But yeah, so I founded Reimagine Agriculture to look at these agricultural systems through a systems lens. Because I think that often with agriculture, we're really only seeing pieces of it and people are really disconnected. So I think what we have the ability to look at the system-wide causes of these problems and better account for them. Because a lot of the costs of agriculture are much more indirect. And we do this through three primary ways. So first is building alliances. So we work with other organizations to help understand the gaps in terms of their work around agriculture and what assistance they need. So we found that talking to a lot of organizations, and we talked to organizations across sector, whether it's international development organizations, environmental organizations, food security organizations, that a lot of them don't feel like they either have the knowledge or the resources to work on this. So a lot of environmental organizations, for example, have problems with their funders because they don't want to fund stuff that's against animal agriculture, often because that's a lot where their funding comes from. So we can work with them to partner them with other organizations who have addressed similar challenges. And then when it's a knowledge gap, that's where we can really come in and help them understand where that knowledge is missing, where they can acquire it, or how it can affect their work and improve what they're already doing. So we really love to do that kind of stuff because usually it's us working kind of on a short-term basis with an organization, helping them to understand and address kind of any agricultural issues that they want to better include. And then they go off and do their wonderful work, kind of taking that agricultural piece with it. So that's something we really love to do. The second piece of what we do is knowledge mobilization. So for us, this is really action-based education. So what we really need in this sector is action, people taking account when they learn this knowledge. So there's a big knowledge gap. So we look to talking primarily with high school students and university students, but we do presentations all over to help people understand the root causes of these problems, because they are a little bit confusing and it is a little bit difficult to understand agriculture because the effects are so much more indirect and that we're often still struggling to fully account for them. And so we hope that kind of our presentations really lead to an actionable result, whether it's a change in their personal lives and or kind of collective changes in policies. The last thing we do on that note is policy campaigns. So especially in agriculture, there's a lot of policy work that needs to be done. And I think in some ways there's some low hanging fruit here that we can really easily accomplish if we do get these policies in place that would drastically reduce things like food waste and animal agriculture. So currently our policy campaign is on a meat alternative called cultivated meat. So it's the process of growing meat in a lab. So that's one of our focuses, but I think that there's a lot of policy changes that need to happen to address what needs to be done in the sector in Canada.
Well, I wonder if you could just say more about why do we need to reimagine agriculture? And if we do, how is it going to help with climate change?
Absolutely. You kind of hit on the big 2 points of food waste and kind of plant-based diets. So why do we need to reimagine agriculture? So agriculture, especially in the last 50 years, is getting significantly worse. So in the last 50 years, our population has doubled, but meat consumption has quadrupled. And that's really, really negative. And so so animal agriculture obviously has a lot of effects, but what we're really needing to do every time we're raising an animal is it's actually a calorie negative process. Because when you think about it, you have to grow all the food and then you feed it to an animal and then you get to eat that food. So beef is the worst example of this, where it takes 25 calories for every calorie that's produced. So imagine every time you're eating a steak, you're throwing out 25 plates of pasta to get to eat that steak. So that's a really, really inefficient system. And the issue with meat consumption is that as rich countries have been able to afford it, we've drastically increased our meat intake. So meat used to never be kind of something that would be eaten on a daily basis or twice a day, but we've really set that standard to say, no, we are going to eat this much meat regardless. And that's come from a lot of reasons. It's come from the perception of wealth, it's come from industry, it's come from governmental policies. But that's kind of the reality, is that countries that are more well off eat a ton of meat. And now what's helping to increase this global demand is that as countries are developing, they're copying our model. So a lot of people are looking at these countries that are growing, like China or India, and seeing that their meat consumption is increasing and focusing on that, when the focus really needs to be put on us, that we have set a very unsustainable level of meat consumption, and that other countries are coming in, looking at that and copying that. So that really needs to be addressed from an environmental level, but there's also, we're living this current pandemic. So I think we're starting to understand the global health effects of what animal agriculture is doing around antibiotic resistance, around foodborne illness, around zoonotic diseases, and that it's really negative kind of across sectors. So that's kind of animal agriculture in a nutshell. And then the second thing is food waste. So food waste, I think that in some ways it's kind of got the opposite problems of animal agriculture, which is that it's really boring. It's not controversial at all, but that people don't really work on it. So beforehand, for most people, getting enough food was, a significant concern, that we need to make sure we were creating enough food to feed everyone. However, our processes have become much, much more efficient. And that it deals with some of the same problems as animal agriculture. So because industry is really involved in agriculture, it's turned from just buying apples at the store to saying, I want to buy this variety and it looks this way and it's this size and it's perfect. And that this is now my expectation for apples, that all of my apples will, be wonderful and perfect and look really, really nice. And I think that's something we've only started to understand in Canada, is the food waste, not only in the home, but across the system. So at every single level of the system, there's significant losses of food that has been already produced, but it doesn't get sold or it doesn't get used, or that grocery stores, for example, are always have a lot of pressure to keep all stock on hand in case they ever run out of anything, so they can constantly restocking. So that leads to a lot of food being thrown out. So it kind of across the 5 levels of production, we're seeing significant losses. And I think that there's probably 2 big issues there, which is one, companies don't want to pay to donate the food, that it's more work for them to go around and collect this food and make sure it gets donated. And then the second thing, that for more altruistic companies, is that they have a fear of liability. So if they donate the food in good faith, sometimes, no matter how careful everyone is, sometimes, food can get contaminated or there can be other problems with it. So for an industry leader, if it's way cheaper, if the dump is way closer, if there's very low tipping fees, and frankly, you don't really have extra time anyway, it's much easier to bring it there versus to go to the work of figuring out who you would donate this food to, because there's not really a system in place. And then also risking that fear of liability, because they are not benefiting from that donation, but they are possibly incurring a significant cost if there is something that's wrong with the food.
So I'm also wondering if I know it's an indirect relationship, but can you draw more of an indirect line between like a person deciding to give up burgers and how that affects greenhouse gases in the atmosphere? And the same.
Yeah, so I'll get into that a little bit. So I think that so we talked about kind of that it's a calorie negative process. And so there's a lot of inefficiencies because when you think of growing that crop of food, okay, that's, the water input, the land input, there's air pollution coming from that, extra water pollution coming from that, and then there's the fertilizers to fertilize that crop. And then, we can keep tracing it back to let's look at the company who produces the fertilizers and the effects there. However, there's also a lot of really significant global impacts that I don't think we see, especially here in Canada, because we do have so much land. The biggest is that, or one of the biggest is just the amount of land use. So animal agriculture requires a significant amount of land input. And, on the whole, that seems concerning, but doesn't seem too concerning until we realize the fact that we're tearing down the Amazon to put more cattle on it. So in many ways, we are often reducing these vastly needed carbon sinks. We're taking way more energy, and that these indirect effects of, reducing the carbon sink so that land becomes more efficient, and that land might not be able to be even converted back to have the same value as it used to have. So that those things like the land impacts are the most significant, are really significant drivers in indirect ways that we wouldn't normally account for.
Thanks. So what needs to happen? What are the systemic changes that need to happen, Allison? Are the systemic changes the most effective, or is it most effective to just ask people to reduce their amount of meat and make sure they only buy enough that they're going to eat? What do you think is the most effective pathway to address it?
So there's a lot of systemic challenges, and I think there's a lot of personal challenges. So two of the systemic issues that I've kind of mentioned as I've been discussing it, the first is just the knowledge gap. At every level, there's a really significant knowledge gap. I'd say even up to 2 or 3 years ago, when I was doing presentations to audiences that came from an environmental background, many people had not heard that meat reduction was a part of climate change. And of course, meat reduction is an incredibly significant part of climate change. So the fact that people in our sector, even quite recently, weren't aware of this, or at least aren't aware of the vast significance of it. That's a really big problem. And I think it's a problem that's reflected at all levels because people don't care. Politicians aren't, responsive to it, and they aren't being aware of this. And that there's a lack of policies in place, there's government issues. And so pretty much at every level, we're really not understanding how big these effects are and how much work really needs to be done on them. The second, I would say, is the influence of industry. So agriculture, as most of us probably on this call know, it's a really significant lobbyer. So in Canada, the meat and dairy lobby combined is by far the biggest lobby group. And so this has a lot of significant consequences. I know that dairy farmers are often in school presentations these days advocating for the benefits of milk, when of course there's much more sustainable options in oat milk and that type of thing. So that's a really big issue. And that industry, I think, has really focused on selling these ideas that diet is an individual choice and no one should be able to say anything about anyone's diet because it's an individual choice. When of course the effects of a personal choice for me is, if I'm eating a lot of meat, that's affecting the Amazon rainforest, where people are losing their homes, we're losing that really big carbon sink. And so there's really, really significant effects of an individual diet. And I don't think it should be something that's only considered a personal choice. So I think that those are kind of the two big, I would say, questions or big things that really need to be addressed in our sector. And as well, also, I think realizing that's not an all or nothing approach. Most, people who are most famous for meat reductions are vegan. So I think a lot of people either see it as I can, keep eating the amount of meat I'm eating, or I can go vegan and be good for the environment. When of course, everyone needs to drastically reduce their meat intake. And, if it's 50%, that's amazing. That's a really significant change. And so I think if we could focus on that it's not necessarily about total abstinence, if that is impossible for you, but just saying, where are those opportunities to reduce meat? And then on a systemic level for food waste, the most significant thing is there's just a lot of really low-hanging fruit, frankly, in terms of policies that need to be created. The government could pass a bill tomorrow suggesting that we fix the issues with liability so that companies who are acting in good faith and donating food in good faith aren't at risk for those liabilities in the way that they currently are. And that we could also just put a rule in that says all food that isn't sold has to be donated. And that companies are really heavily penalized when they don't do that or when they just dump it. Because, for example, the effects of composting and what happens when we just kind of put food in a landfill is that there's a lot of methane released. And so that if we could be composting that food, that would be a much more significant betterment, and that if we can have food that is edible, going to the people who need it. Because I think what we forget in these discussions when I'm talking about inefficiencies and externalities is that there are 4 million Canadians in Canada who are food insecure. And that, that's the biggest justice issue, I think, or a really significant justice issue in agriculture, that there's so many of us that are so privileged that we're choosing between varieties of apples when there's a significant percentage of our population who doesn't even know where they're going to get their next meal.
Great points. So I'm wondering, what do you see as the status of change in the ag sector? What's the status of reimagining agriculture, and where do we need to go?
So, there's significant issues, but I think that there's also a lot to be excited about. I think that I now see that I think that there's a growing global understanding that meat needs to be reduced. For example, in Australia, they recently announced that they've reduced meat to what it was in 1996 levels. And that's really significant that there is a country that's globalized that has managed to do this. I think that that's tremendously encouraging, because behavior changes is one of the most difficult things to do. If you make a decision about lots of different things, if I choose to live in a smaller home, that's a one-time decision, but food is a decision people make every day. And it's really hard to do those behavior changes. So I think the fact that we're seeing that in Australia is an incredibly encouraging sign. And then I think as well, part of what's I think is going to be critical in that meat reduction is looking for either meat that's created in food production facilities and plant-based alternatives like the Impossible Burger. I personally just think that behavior change is really hard to do, and that those can be very significant in terms of giving people an alternative that's easier to switch to, that in time can be cost effective, and that will help them transition to make that switch. Food waste, I think that there's a lot to go, but in 2019, for example, an organization here in Toronto, Second Harvest, they put out a really good report, and it's really the first report we've had in Canada like this, that goes through the entire food sector to actually give us the data on the amount of food that we are losing. So they calculated in Canada 58%, so over half of food we are currently losing. So that's a really significant loss. But before 2019, we really had no idea what the exact size of that loss was and where it was happening along the system. So I think that now that we have this report, I think that is starting to gain traction. I think that we're starting to understand that food waste is an issue in the home, but it's also an issue across the system, and that there's a lot of policies that can be put in place very quickly to address these concerns.
So if you had to summarize, would you say that Canada's sort of at the beginning of change in this sector?
I think we're at the beginning of change. Meat reduction, it isn't, or meat consumption, it isn't increasing overall. And I think it's slightly decreasing, but these reductions are really slight at best. And I think when we're looking at a few percentage points either way, it's nothing, frankly, to be too excited about. I think I was really hoping that this pandemic would be the start of that, but there's a report recently that Canadians are eating more meat during the pandemic. So I guess that that hasn't gone that way. But I think that there is a lot to be hopeful for. That I think that plant-based alternatives are getting better and better, and people are becoming more open to them, and that they're available at more restaurants. And to me, it's really notable. In Toronto, of course, there's a lot of vegan restaurants, but what's really notable to me is that there are more and more vegan and vegetarian options at mainstream restaurants, and that hopefully that's helping people move from this idea of, oh, I could never be vegan, to, oh yeah, I can cut meat out this much, or I've got these options and I'm happy to default to them a lot of the time.
Interesting. And I'll throw in something about Project Drawdown's modeling of the plant-rich diet solution, which is, it's not based on people becoming vegans. It's based more on people reducing their meat consumption by half, and also taking into account that some people around the world are not able to add animal protein into their diets, and allowing for some increase in certain parts of the world, while also, encouraging a decrease in the more developed countries that are eating the most meat. So it's not, if you can't manage veganism, there's still a very large impact to be had by just reducing meat consumption. So thanks, Allison. I'm sure we'll come back a little later to some of these issues, but I want to go to Shahraz and hear more about the work that you're doing.
Sure. Thanks, Crystal. EcoAmmo specializes in sustainable consulting to provide clients with advice to reach regenerative architecture, net zero energy, and carbon neutral projects. So we've just celebrated our 15th year in business, and have also facilitated over 200 LEED certifications of buildings all over, not just Alberta, but now into Ontario. So we're delighted to sort of help people reach that drawdown through smarter design and construction. And we do that by encouraging collaboration. The design and construction industry has not seen any productivity increase in the last 50 years, like any other industries like manufacturing, which have utilized smarter processes like lean manufacturing and agile development. So we actually ourselves train our colleagues to become lean practitioners in a way that helps the design and construction process. And that yields up to 20% or more in savings in the construction cost of buildings, which is our argument to push for sustainable designs that clients couldn't afford or didn't think they could afford, like solar, geo exchange, all sorts of renewables and high performance building systems. So I can kind of give you also a quick case study in which we help not just new buildings kind of get better to net zero energy and carbon neutrality, but even existing buildings. So
can I interrupt just a sec to ask you a quick question? So are you focused primarily on non-residential buildings, or both?
We do multifamily residential buildings. We actually have done LEED for home certifications as well, but it's mostly the larger commercial, institutional, multifamily kind of work.
Okay.
Yeah. So what I'd love to share is just this case study we did for La Cité Francophone. It's a community in Edmonton that basically had a building that's about 30 years old. So not that old. It's this lovely building buried into the ground and in an existing mature neighborhood. And they approached us to help with a 10-year plan to achieve sort of a carbon neutral community hub. So this building has a theater, has offices for not-for-profits focused on the Francophone community in Edmonton. It has a really cool restaurant and other cultural aspects that really bring life to the community. So on the right is a slide where we did a thermal scan on a very, frosty -40 Edmonton day in the winter to show sort of, again, challenges in the building envelope and the glass and structural systems that basically bleed out energy, down to the doors and lack of weather stripping, down to the older mechanical units, but on the plus side, new boilers that they installed. And it's unfortunate where we weren't able to get to this building earlier so we can help them improve the envelope so they didn't need such a big boiler to keep it warm in the winter. The other interesting things and low-hanging fruit are gaping holes in buildings. This building had like a 4-inch diameter little hole that we found that basically has gone unnoticed until we scanned it and did a thorough review. And even the low-hanging fruit, like programmable thermometers have, thermostats rather, have not been implemented yet. Even plumbing fixtures, believe it or not, I'll show you sort of a slide where we showed the net present value and the carbon savings of just changing out plumbing fixtures and faucets to low flow faucets that make an enormous GHG impact, let alone cost or ongoing cost. Again, lighting is a really low hanging fruit in this building. It has been renovated over the last 30 years in 3 different times. So it has 3 different types of lighting, down to, new LED lighting in some cases, but really old incandescents and fluorescents in others. So we also did an analysis on how they can add renewables to the building. It has quite a large roof area here and really good southern exposure. So there's very simple ways we can show this is the roof area that has great solar exposure that can reap the benefits of that. And we really emphasize on doing the easy things right off the bat because they have an immediate return on their investment. I think there's even just behavioral ideas where we say, why are you using personal heaters under the desk? There's obviously a building controls problem. So they didn't have programmable thermostats. So it's like, well, the first thing to do is ensure you can commission or recommission the building so it operates and provides the right temperature for people in spaces, and get them to get rid of these personal heaters that are really massive energy sucks. And when we do an analysis, we give them a cost and a GHG sort of breakdown to say, here's the really simple things to do. So if you can even install coolers with timers, so when you provide cold water at water fountains, there's actually going to be a really amazing energy savings and GHG savings. So in this case, you can see sort of how we've been able to show some really cheap, inexpensive things deliver a big impact, from everything from low flow aerators that cost, $150 to change all of them in the building, delivering a large impact immediately to the building, up to the very big price points of changing windows and doors and boilers and air handlers that also yield GHG reductions, but can be somewhat more costly to implement. So we take an approach where we help determine over the course of the building retrofit how to really create a roadmap to get to carbon neutrality, obviously over a number of years and through a phased kind of approach. The one thing we do, which is really important in our work, is integrate different people who need to work on this problem. So again, in integrated project delivery, we bring on the trades people who work on the mechanical, electrical, lighting systems, ventilation systems, with the designers, and we pair them together to come up with sort of the best possible combinations of solutions. So that's quite the short of it, I guess.
And do you think, I'm very interested in that concept that you make this collaborative and bring all the parties together. Do you think that's your secret sauce?
We don't want it to be a secret sauce. So actually a good chunk of our work is lean training to other colleagues in the industry. Like we actually spend a lot of our time training contractors, architects, engineers in a lean methodology and process of how to work in a smarter way, so they can actually reap the savings for the owners of buildings that need to do this. Like, we believe in an abundance mentality. We have to share this secret sauce so we can get more buildings retrofitted, more buildings sort of using far less energy and expending far less carbon.
So this is sort of a two-part question, but so are you working primarily on retrofits or new construction? And where do you think is the most opportunity? It's a multi-part question, but.
Sure. We are doing several new projects. So I would say actually still most of our work is new construction. Unfortunately, I would completely emphasize that retrofits are an amazingly large market opportunity. And that's really where the problem is. Like, there's far more existing buildings than new buildings. And we really need to tackle that retrofit market, because even in this building I just showed, it's only 30 years old, but it's so inefficient that just providing new building automation and management systems is going to make it 25% more efficient. Just the tweaking of the building systems that control all of the boilers, air handling units, and air conditioning, that's like easy win right away. And I can't tell you how many buildings I walked into, and the first thing they tell me is, well, it's too hot in this corner, but too cold in that corner. And I just, oh dear, there's so much easy wins to tackle that if only there was enough time.
Well, what do you think are the obstacles to retrofitting more buildings?
More, I guess, not knowing that there's easy wins and easy fixes to building management systems, not knowing or not having energy advisors for building owners who just pass along the inefficiency to their tenants, because building owners really, most of the time, have their tenants pay the utilities. So there's really no incentive for the building owner to go in and change out building systems. It won't save them that much money. It'll only save their tenants on the operating costs. So we have to kind of show sort of a greater win at the end of the day, using tools like, especially in Alberta, where the economy is hurting and there's a glut of space, building owners can market their buildings to be healthier, more efficient, to attract new tenants. And that will be sort of a better way to approach certain expenditure for that capital improvement.
Interesting. Yes. Okay. Thank you so much. That's super interesting. I wanted to ask a few questions. Well, I wanted to start with a question that interests me.
Sure.
As the moderator, I get to do that. So often people ask, so just people generally ask, well, what can I do? Especially where they hear about climate solutions and they, are motivated to take action. We often hear, what can we do? And I think that there's a lot of information out there about climate action geared to the individual and household level. And I'm just wondering, what do you think is the most effective to do the sort of massive scaling of climate solutions that we need? Is it to focus on individuals, or to focus on how individuals can join together or use their influence, collective influence, or what? And it may be different for your different sectors. I don't know, but I'm just very curious to hear your answer to that question when it's asked, like, what can people do? What would you say? So not necessarily going for the low-hanging fruit answer, but the answer that's likely to result in the most impact.
Well, for our sector, I think it's trying to ask, how do we leverage the best results by collectively attacking the problem? Like, I think what we see in the design and construction industry is silos of information. And just, we need to start busting the silos of information and having that collaboration and integration of the process happen. So the mechanical engineer can work with the architect to say, hey, if you just add a little bit more insulation, my boiler size and air handler size will come down a notch or two, because they're completely related together. So what we hope to do is that collaborative effort of telling our industry, start to talk to each other, talk to each other to leverage the innovations and the opportunities, and just to hear about what other people are working on. So you can, it's funny, the most interesting innovations we've seen is when, say, electrical engineer who has nothing to do with a structural system might have a really brilliant idea that helps solve a problem to that particular process. And it's only by bringing all of these groups together we see that opportunity. And I think that's the case for individuals. I have also hope that, and I heard it earlier with Chris's kids, like scolding him about not doing enough. I think we have to really hope our next generation is going to just take action into overdrive, because we need them to really do what our generation has not. So we sat on our hands and watched sort of this whole carbon problem for the last 30 plus years keep ballooning more and more, and they are definitely going to have to do something to avoid our substantial challenges ecologically that we would anticipate if we don't. So bust the silos.
Great. Chris, what do you have to say on that question?
On an individual level, I would say research and education is a good start. For my product, installing solar is often like having a kid. It's 9 months from conception to birth. And in the first trimester, you're researching, you're educating yourself, you're talking to people that have already done it. So that's always a first step, because there's all kinds of misconceptions about, if I put one panel on the roof, does that mean that I have power in the event of an outage? Things like that. Need to learn about the fact that this is a financial decision. Everybody has different reasons for wanting to do it, but ultimately it is a financial decision. That's what it comes down to. If you own your house and you own your roof, whether it's your home or your business, then you're in a great position to benefit from it financially. So start looking at it from that perspective. There's great resources online, but pick up the phone and talk to people, because there's all kinds of bad information online as well. So make sure you're getting informed. And yes, of course, do things for the right reasons, as far as protecting future generations, making sure that the climate change situation that we're in currently doesn't continue to get worse. But look at this from a financial perspective, because 99 times out of 100, it makes sense in that regard.
So to your mind, is the individual action the most effective mechanism for scaling adoption of solar? Or are there any other levers that you think might be more have more impact, or is there any collective action that you think would accelerate scaling of the adoption of solar?
Individuals can become advocates. So I'll touch on Allison's talk a little bit. So how long does it take to figure out if somebody's a vegetarian? 2 minutes, because that's how long it's going to take them to tell you, right? And I am one. It took me an hour and 10 minutes to tell you, but that's how long it takes for somebody to talk about solar after they've gone solar. So we have mechanisms like you'll have an app on your phone that at any given moment, 24/7, 365, you can show somebody what the production on your roof is. That's a handy tool. Not so much right now. People aren't handing one another their phones. We're not getting within 6 feet of one another. But in regular times, that's a great tool to become an advocate. Once you either install or you get educated on it, you're going to want to tell other people. And that's my point about being a vegetarian and going solar. So the more advocates that we have, the better off we are. If you're in a situation where you're just graduating from university and the idea of actually taking out a mortgage right now doesn't seem like a possibility, convince your aunt and your uncle who are already in a position where they could actually, make that change happen. So do your research, get educated, and then tell everybody you know.
Thanks. And how about you, Allison? I know you touched on this a bit before, but what do you think is the most, the biggest accelerator? So individual action or some other collective action, or what?
Yeah, I think that this is something that agriculture, I think, has gotten to test out a little bit with kind of Chris's joke of vegetarians and vegans. That I think I think individual change is great and it's necessary. I mean, I think most of the time, not being in any kind of a weird circumstance, the biggest thing anyone can do to improve their personal environmental footprint is to go vegan. Of course, though, I think that what needs to be done is that we need to just set a norm around meat reduction. So, for example, my parents are never going to give up meat. And I'm aware of this, that this is very much within their culture, that this is something that they've grown up. But when I go over, I can bring plant-based meals. And so they get used to saying, I can have meals without meat being in the center of the table. And I think that, look for those people who it's not about getting them to be vegetarian, but if they can open their mind to saying, hey, maybe I'm going to only eat meat at dinner time, or I'm going to figure out what's going to work for me in terms of meat reduction. I think that in terms of collective action, like our government really needs to be pushed to work on agriculture. Kind of all of the grants we've been discussing for the other industries, they are not available for agriculture in this way, to the fact that, we actively fund meat and dairy specifically. So we're in many ways working the opposite direction. And there's some positive food and there's some positive, things going on. For example, the food guide that Canada released, it's an almost plant-based food guide. So at least I think that, everyone should be going to their MP and saying, well, if you're saying that this is what we need to be eating, why on earth are we not, why are we promoting the exact opposite things? Why are we getting dairy farmers in schools teaching children to drink more milk? And I think too, that as we're able to understand the larger ramifications of agriculture, that because the costs are so indirect, I think often the only interaction most of us have with it is picking the right apple at the store. But I think that anyone who pretty much works in any sector, it's going to be something that's relevant to you. Global health, this is absolutely critical. And then we're looking at poverty. There's 2 billion more people coming in the next 30 years, and we need to make sure that we have enough food for them. And that's a really significant concern, and that these issues around food waste and animal agriculture is absolutely a justice issue as much as it's an environmental issue, as much as it's a health issue. And I think that when we can understand the interconnections to say these are not partisan ideas, but this is just base level inefficiency, and that this inefficiency is literally costing lives, it's costing the environment, and that it's causing damages that we will really have a difficult time mitigating going forward, and accelerating other aspects of climate change.
Great. So Allison, I just want to pick up on a point that you raised and ask this question of everyone. And Allison, feel free to add anything. What are the opportunities in your sector to repair harm that's been caused by environmental injustice? We've finally getting a lot more attention on, communities that have been harmed by our fossil fuel based system and other environmental harms that are more concentrated among certain groups of people around the world. So what are any opportunities in your sector to either to repair this harm and also to move forward with climate solutions in a way that causes no future harm? So do you want to, you're unmuted, Allison, if you want to add anything.
Sure. So I think, so as I think we're able to build this global understanding, we'll look at, I think, a lot of these issues. So I think a lot of them are around land rights. Frankly, it's one of the biggest influences that we need to look at a lot of this as we're able to move away from meat production as it actively is, as we're able to look at those lands and try to convert them back into what they originally were and convert them into being better carbon sinks. I think that we really owe it to a lot of these, a lot of indigenous territory we've taken to grow animals, and that a lot of places in the world we've done a lot to take their land, or governments have taken their land to use it for agriculture, and that's really significant. And then more than that, we need to actually start taking accountability for those indirect effects. Animal agriculture produces most of the air pollution and the water pollution from agriculture. So in the total system of agriculture, animal agriculture, which only creates 18% of our global calories, creates about 56% of our air and water pollution. So it's created a drastically huge effect. And so, when there are children being diagnosed with asthma more often, when your kid gets diagnosed with asthma, you're not going to go out there and yell at the meat farmers next to you. But I think that we do need to be aware that if we are continuing to choose these diets, that there are global health effects, and that we need to mitigate that and address that and say that if we're causing health issues for other people, when we're taking away their land, when we're taking away their ability to live a good life, and we're already seeing kind of the first environmental refugees, that's just not acceptable. And even if these effects are indirect, they can't go unaccounted for.
Thanks. Chris, looks like did you want to add something?
Yeah, I always look like I'm about to say something. Both of my grandfathers on both sides were coal miners. I call them energy pioneers. So the energy industry for a long time has been a part of the problem, and recently are part of the solution. So solar technology, for instance, the actual cells themselves, they haven't changed very much in the last 60 years. Vanguard and Sputnik are satellites that are going around the Earth that are powered by solar. They've had to swap out the panels a couple times, but the solar technology itself, it's not the flying car. It's proven. It's been around for a long time. But, people are energy reliant. We're able to communicate here because of the petroleum industry and creating the computers that we're using and the phones that we're using and the jacket that I have on. All of those things are part of the problem that has led to the situation that we're in as far as climate change. But the energy sector in particular is somebody who could lead the way. Distributed energy resources being implemented into the grid. That's a real thing now that can help drive the innovation that we need, as well as the solutions that we currently need. So yes, energy is something that it's become like water and air. People absolutely need it. We're not going to be just turning off the well on pulling carbon out of the earth and then emitting it into the atmosphere. That's not going to happen. We're going to transition away from fossil fuels into renewables, And it needs to be done with the mindset that the people that are working in the fossil fuel industry are taken care of. So having a plan leads to disasters. So we saw that with the cod fishery. We saw that with the lumber industry. We saw that with asbestos in Quebec. So not having a plan is what leads to disastrous results. Having a plan to get the workforce to transition away from fossil fuels into renewables is essential. And that needs to happen right now. The builders in the country, as I mentioned, are on board. They see the writing on the wall. The people that are working at the local distribution companies like Hydro One and Hydro Ottawa, for instance, they know that this is taking place, and they know that the grid right now needs upgrades to do it. The nuclear industry is a big part of this as well. They're going to be part of the transition away from fossil fuels into renewables. So all of these things can't be left out, but the biggest thing is we need to have a plan to be able to transition.
Thank you. And Shafraz.
I want to add, we should not underestimate the power of regulation. And frankly, we have that problem here in Alberta with a rather conservative government that probably is much like Ontario, trying to deregulate everything and trying not to add what they call more red tape. But when you were asking what's going to drive change faster, frankly, it's going to be more regulation. And that regulation then creates those plans. And that's the signal to industry to get their shit together and really do stuff. We're having that problem potentially right now with certain special interest groups saying, well, you shouldn't regulate because it's going to kill innovation, or it's going to put us out of business, or it's like they're creating a variety of excuses to stop any change and remain in the status quo. And we know the same issue is not going to solve itself with the same thinking. So we really must demand from our politicians a little bit more leadership, and frankly, a little bit more truth telling, because what we also don't have in our world is people who know what is fake news from what is the reality and the actual science. And so I really need to urge people to call upon politicians to do this science fact checking and tell that science from what they believe in for the benefit of the greater society. Like it's kind of driving me crazy. We have a polarizing world where we have people wanting to do the right thing but are just confused by what is fact and what is fiction. It's like, this isn't that hard. So we need to hold our leaders accountable and try to then also nudge them in a way that we can get them mobilizing industry through regulation on the right path.
Thank you. So we have a few minutes left. I want to give each of our panelists an opportunity to share, any resources that you want to direct our audience to, or where they can follow you, or learn more about your work. If you like. I'll start by saying that please be welcome to visit drawdown.org for more information about 80 different climate solutions and more about Project Drawdown's analysis and modeling, as well as some of our resources like the Climate Solutions 101 video series. Drawdown.org. Anyone else?
Yeah, so Reimagine Agriculture, we're reimagineagriculture.org. Reimagine Agriculture, I think, across all socials except for Twitter, where I think we're Reimagine Ag. But yeah, check out our website. And then as well, We do a lot of policy campaigns, and we are often looking for volunteers. So our current policy campaign is looking at alternatives to meat that we're hoping that the government will help to incentivize instead of de-incentivizing. So if you are interested in that, please reach out to us there about that, because we desperately need volunteers across Canada who are interested to go to their MP and advocate on these issues. And so, yeah, you can follow us across all of our socials and volunteer with us, and then also just keep in touch, because we have some exciting resources coming out on the knowledge mobilization side that will be publicly available. And then as well, if you do want to have us at your workplace or your classroom, we are usually happy to do that for no cost. So you can reach out to us about that as well.
I can go. Ecoammo.com is our website. We actually have quite an active social media channels, whether it's Instagram or Facebook, where we talk about what we're up to and how to get there. Another really great building resource is Architecture 2030. It's a program to help the building world get to carbon neutrality with that 2030 goal, which is super ambitious, but it has some great resources of how to approach the integration of systems and how to make that happen. And within Canada, the Canadian Green Building Council has the Zero Carbon Building Framework, which is really important and very robust kind of set of guidelines of how to get there. So any of those can help in that direction.
Great, thanks.
I would look at organizations like Enviro Center in Ottawa, the Ottawa Renewable Energy Cooperative, Home Soul Building Solutions. Those are great places to start to research on what a home energy audit looks like, as well as get building innovation in the forefront. There's other places to check, like Enviro Marketing, where is a great resource for finding out information. And then hexiconconstruction.com is where you find me most of the time. But check out, what's going on with NRCan, for instance. Check out what's going on with the federal government and the programs that are coming in there. Energy Evolution Ottawa. But you'll find information about all of those things at hexiconconstruction.com.
Great. Thank you. I want to thank all the panelists. This has been such an interesting discussion. Thank you, and thanks to our audience. And now I'll pass it back to Lucas.
Great, thank you so much. All I can really say is, wow. Thank you all. That was illuminating, fascinating. I hope everybody in the audience appreciated that as much as I did. Just interesting and up-to-date perspectives on all these issues, but also in a lot of depth and explained in ways that I think are, very straightforward and appealing to a lot of people. So thanks so much for sharing all those thoughts. As promised, now I will get into a little bit of what's coming up from CEP before kind of closing this event off. So if we wonder what we're doing and kind of what's coming up, I'm just going to go ahead and share our website, which is the best way to stay up to date on everything. Stay up to date on everything here. Just jump over to the website. So you probably signed up on this page. If you go to our homepage, you will see the next upcoming event. And the best way to see what's coming down the pipeline is right here. So this is tonight's event, Reaching Drawdown. Our next event is going to be just a free virtual speed networking event. This is the third one we've done, and they've both been really, really fun and interesting, where you just get to meet a lot of fascinating people, generally in the Ottawa area, but also from across Canada, who are working in the environment field or looking to get into it. And that's going to be on June 22nd. On July 20th, we're doing an event on mental health and sustainability, and the interrelation of those two things, both kind of climate anxiety, but also a lot of nature-based and other solutions to some common mental health issues that are kind of affecting many of us today. So those are the events that we have coming up, and we have something almost every month. So I encourage you to stay in touch. The best ways to stay in touch are, of course, LinkedIn. We're going to be posting this event and all of our events on YouTube. Our Facebook and Twitter are also great ways to stay in touch. And if you want to get emails, you go up here to log in and just sign up and create an account. So I just wanted to quickly show that. That's the best way to stay up to date with CEP and see what's coming down the pipeline. Thank you so much, Crystal, Allison, Chris, and Shafraz for your contributions, for being part of this event. Thank you to Allison and the CEP team for organizing this event. And thank you to all of you for joining us and being part of this fantastic discussion. I look forward to seeing you at the next one.